The silver was cold in her hands when she heard the carriage. Eliza Croft had learned, in 3 months at Ashmore Park, to read sound the way a navigator reads weather. The creak of Mrs. Pendle's step on the second stair meant someone had rung without cause. The particular clatter of trays in the kitchen passage meant the cook was displeased and would remain so until supper. The sound that came through the great hall's long windows on that October morning was different. Wheels on gravel, the stamp of horses held after hard driving, a man's voice low and brief. That sound carried a different weight entirely. The house did not stir for ordinary arrivals. It held its breath. Eliza set down the silver candlestick. She should not have been visible from the window. She was not, precisely, standing at the window. She was simply close enough to it that when the carriage door opened and the man stepped down, she could see him clearly. She knew him at once, not gradually, not with the slow dawning of a half-remembered face. She knew him the way you know a piece of music you have not heard in 4 years, in the body, before the mind has time to question it. The set of his shoulders. The particular way he paused before he moved, as if calculating the weight of the air. The dark coat, the high collar, the hands that did not gesture but simply waited at his sides. He was older. He held himself differently, as a man holds himself when something has been taken from him and he has decided not to show it. He was the same man, Edmund Hartwell. He was a duke now. He had not been a duke the last time she saw him. The last time she had seen him, she had been standing in the rain. Eliza stepped back from the window. The candlestick was still in her hand. She placed it very carefully on the cloth, and she breathed, and she reminded herself of what she was. She was the housemaid. That was all. What she had been before, the clergyman's daughter who had read Latin and played adequately at pianoforte, and believed that good sense and a small portion might still earn a respectable life, that woman had died with her father in the spring of her 18th year, buried under unpaid debts and a parsonage that belonged to the next incumbent. What she had been before was not relevant to Ashmore Park, to the silver on the cloth, to the footsteps now crossing the gravel toward the front door. What she had been before was not relevant to anything at all. She heard the front door open. She heard Lady Beatrice's voice, warm and proprietary, welcoming him home. Eliza picked up the cloth and began polishing again. Her hands did not shake. She noted that with something close to pride. If you have ever stood in a rain that seems to have chosen you specifically, you will understand the particular quality of that morning 4 years past. Not a general shower, a rain with intention. Eliza had been on the road between Framlingham and Ipswich, the borrowed cart having thrown a wheel 2 miles back, and she had taken shelter under the wide eave of the Lamb and Flag, just as the sky made its decision. She was carrying her father's medical bill to the surgeon in the village. She had 3 shillings and 4pence in her pocket, and the bill asked for 7. She had not yet worked out the arithmetic of the difference. The man appeared from around the inn's corner at a near run, already wet, his hat in his hand. He drew up under the eave beside her without ceremony. "Wretched morning," he said. Not to her specifically, to the general injustice of English October. "Yes," she said. He glanced at her then. Really glanced, the way some men do not, taking in the bill in her hand, the state of her boots, the smallness of her situation without editing the observation. He did not look away immediately. "Are you stranded?" he said. "The cart," she said. 2 miles back." He nodded. They stood together under the eave in silence for a moment, watching the road fill with brown water. He was perhaps 6 years older than she. He had a serious face, the kind that did not move quickly toward either expression. She noticed, in the involuntary way one notices such things when standing in forced proximity, that he smelled of leather and wood smoke, and something cold and outdoor, that the rain was washing away. "My man has gone for the carriage," he said. "It will be some minutes." She did not respond. There was nothing to respond to. "Are you going far?" he said. "Ipswich," she said. "The surgeon's office." He looked at the bill again. He did not ask. She was grateful that he did not ask. They stood in silence. The rain fell. She was cold, but not unbearably so. And she had learned by then the economy of endurance, the practice of accepting what was while it was, without the additional suffering of resisting it. She thought of her father, who was 63 years old and had never recovered from the winter fever, and whose hands trembled now when he tried to write. She thought of the 4 shillings she did not have. She thought of the road that was still there, waiting, whatever she thought about it. When the carriage came, it came quickly. A dark equipage, 4 horses, a man on the box who called out from the street with urgency. The man at her side straightened. His body changed, almost imperceptibly, from the body of a man sheltering in the rain to the body of a man with somewhere to be. He took 1 step toward the carriage. He stopped. He turned back to her, and he looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on a man's face before, and has not, she thought, in the years since, ever seen on a man's face since. A look that named what he could not say. "I see you. I am sorry. There is nothing I can do that would not be worse than leaving." He climbed into the carriage. The door closed. The horses moved. She stood in the rain. She did not move from under the eave for a long time. Later, she told herself she had simply been waiting for the rain to ease. She had learned, in the years since, to be honest with herself about most things. It had not been the rain she was waiting for. She had not known his name. She had not known why urgency had pulled him away so completely that the step back toward her had been the one step he did not take. She had known only the feeling of being seen, and then, in the same moment, left standing in the rain, which is a feeling so specific and so peculiar that it does not blur with time the way other feelings do. He was the Duke of Ashmore. He was her employer. He did not know she was alive. That, at least, had not changed. The household spent the next 3 days in the particular productive chaos of a great house preparing to receive its master. Fires were lit in rooms that had been cold since summer. Linen was aired and pressed and fitted to beds that had held nothing but darkness for months. Cook prepared dishes that required advance notice of ingredients, and she did it in a tone that suggested this was an imposition she had accepted under protest. Lady Beatrice Ashmore, the Duke's mother's younger sister, who had managed Ashmore Park in his absence with the confidence of a woman who has decided that absence is a permanent state, moved through the preparation with brisk efficiency and the periodic expression of someone who has been proved wrong about something and is choosing not to acknowledge it. Eliza worked. This was what she was at Ashmore, a woman who worked. She carried coals and emptied grates and remade beds and polished surfaces that had already been polished, and she did all of it quietly and well. And in 3 months she had earned the limited approval of Mrs. Pendle and the complete indifference of everyone else. This was not a misfortune. Indifference was the correct temperature for a woman in her situation. Indifference meant you did your work and kept your memories, and no one asked you questions you did not want to answer. She had worked hard at being indifferent. She was beginning to suspect it was about to become difficult. On the second evening, she was sent to set the library for the Duke's use. Fresh candles, the coal box filled, the reading chair angled to the fire. She did the work quickly, and in the order she had been shown. She was nearly finished when she noticed the portrait above the mantelpiece. She had not been in this room before. She had not seen it. 2 men, painted some years past in a composition that suggested youth and ease rather than formality. The elder by perhaps 2 years, fair where the other was dark, with a laughing quality in his face that the painter had captured with unusual accuracy. The younger sat at an angle, his expression more reserved, a book in his hand that he was not quite reading. She recognized the angle of the jaw, the particular quality of stillness. Below the portrait, in a small frame on the mantelpiece shelf, a miniature of the fair-haired man alone, set behind glass, a ribbon of black crepe folded beneath it. She understood then what urgency had called him away from the rain. The knowing settled into her chest with the specific weight of grief that belongs to other people, the grief that comes from understanding. Too late. Why a thing happened the way it did. It did not change what had happened. It did not change the rain. It gave the look he had turned back to give her, however, a different meaning than the one she had assigned it in the years since. And that different meaning was, if anything, harder to carry. She finished setting the room. She left without looking at the portrait again. If the story were only a memory, it might have been endurable. The third evening brought the Duke himself. He came down to dinner late. The table had been set for 3. Himself, Lady Beatrice, and Miss Cecily Drummond, a neighbor's daughter who was seated at dinner with the practiced ease of a woman who had been seated at this particular table more than once, and whose gown was precisely calibrated to be admired without appearing to have required calculation. She was handsome in the way that draws attention and holds it. She knew exactly where the candlelight was, and had arranged herself accordingly. Eliza moved around the table's edge in the careful unseen choreography of service. She refilled the wine. She removed a dish. She was furniture, or close enough. Edmund Hartwell, Duke of Ashmore, sat at the head of the table with the quality of presence that some men carry and others spend their lives trying to approximate. He spoke little. When Lady Beatrice began her account of the autumn's household improvements, he listened with the visible patience of a man who has learned to let other people's noise flow past him without catching. When Miss Drummond asked whether he planned to remain through Christmas, he said he had not yet decided, and the brevity of it closed the subject in a way that did not invite reopening. He noticed everything. That much was apparent. His attention moved around the room the way a man's attention moves when he has been a long time away from a place and is taking its measure. The curtains, the changed arrangement of a pier glass, the absence, perhaps, of something he expected to see. His gaze passed over Eliza twice, and both times it moved on with no pause at all. She was furniture. He saw furniture. Later, when she had returned the last of the service items to the kitchen and Mrs. Pendle had dismissed the evening staff, she went to her room and sat on the edge of her narrow bed and looked at the wall. She had thought she was prepared. She had been, in the way that a person can be prepared for cold water, knowing it is coming, having stood in cold water before, and being plunged in regardless. The next morning, Lady Beatrice asked to see Mrs. Pendle. Eliza was in the passage outside the sitting room, changing the flowers in the hall table's vase, when Lady Beatrice's voice came clearly through the half-closed door. "The arrangement of the south morning room was incorrect yesterday," Lady Beatrice said. "The Duke noticed it, apparently. I want to know who was responsible." "I will look into it, my lady," Mrs. Pendle said. "Only the housemaid, Edmund," Lady Beatrice said, her voice shifting slightly, the way it shifted when she was addressing something she considered below the level of genuine concern. "She is new. She has not yet learned the way we do things here." A pause. Then a voice she had not heard speak at close quarters since a rainy morning 4 years ago, low and unhurried. "The arrangement seemed well enough to me," he said. Another pause. "As you say," Lady Beatrice said. Eliza moved down the passage with the empty vase, her steps even, her face arranged. She had not heard him enter the sitting room. She had not heard him hear. What she heard now, replaying in the passage between the morning room and the kitchen stair, was not the comment about the arrangement. It was the quality of his voice when he said it. Not defense, not warmth. A statement of observed fact in a register that said, quietly, "I note this, and I am noting that I note it." She did not allow herself anything as foolish as hope. She was aware, in the days that followed, that he had said it. 3 days after his arrival, she could not sleep. This was not unusual. Sleep had never come easily at Ashmore, where the house settled and creaked in ways she had not yet catalogued, and the wind off the park had opinions about gaps in window frames. This particular sleeplessness had a different quality, however, the kind that comes not from discomfort, but from a mind that will not stop arranging things. She had been arranging things for 3 days. The portrait. The voice in the sitting room. The way his gaze had passed over her at dinner, as though she were the silver candlestick she had been holding when his carriage arrived. She rose at a little past 2 in the morning, put on her dress and stockings and shoes with the quiet efficiency of long practice, and took her single candle down the back stair. She was not going to the library. She was going to the kitchen for the small jug of warm water Mrs. Pendle kept in the banked range for exactly this kind of night. The library was simply in the direction of the kitchen stair's first landing, and the library door happened to be open, and the books on the shelves happened to include a copy of Cowper's poems that she had been thinking about for 4 days and had not yet allowed herself to borrow. She was in the room before she heard him. He was in the wing-back chair by the window, not the reading chair by the fire. No candle. The low fire gave just enough light to see him. His coat off, his cravat loose at the throat, a glass of something dark at his elbow. He was reading. He had been reading for some time, she thought, by the quality of his stillness. He looked up. She stopped. The candle threw her shadow enormous against the floor-to-ceiling shelves. "I beg your pardon," she said. The words were automatic, already forming. "I beg your pardon. I was not aware. I will leave immediately." He looked at her. He did not look away. "What were you looking for?" he said. She said nothing. The Cowper was behind her and to her right, close enough to reach, without moving her feet. "The Cowper," she said. "The poems. I should not have come in." She stopped. "Take it," he said. She did not move. "Take the book," he said again. It was my brother's, and he would have been irritated to know it sat unread. She crossed to the shelf. Her fingers found the spine by memory, which she noted afterward with a kind of bitter amusement, because she had told herself she was not coming here specifically. She drew the book out. The leather was soft and the spine was cracked with use, and she could feel without looking that it had been read many times. She turned to go. "You read Latin," he said. She stopped. There was a pause in which she could hear the fire and the wind and her own blood. "There is a passage of Virgil underlined in the 3rd chapter of that volume," he said. "In my brother's hand. You cannot see it in this light. You are standing in exactly the place where a person stands when they have decided to look for something specific." She did not answer. "Sit down," he said. "If you like." She sat in the chair by the fire, the book in her lap, because the alternative was to leave, and she found she did not want to leave. This was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake the moment she made it, and she made it anyway. Which was, she thought, a very concise summary of the last 4 years. He did not speak again for some time. She opened the Cowper and read, and the fire burned, and the wind made its case outside, and the house was very quiet. It was strange to sit in silence with someone who did not know her, and know them in the way she knew him. If you find yourself in a room with a person who has no knowledge of the weight they carry in your memory, you will understand that particular quality of the evening. He was reading. He did not look at her again. She read 3 pages of Cowper and retained almost nothing, because what she was actually doing was noting the line of him in the chair, the way he held the glass without drinking from it, the way he turned a page with the deliberateness of a man who has learned to give complete attention to one thing at a time, or none. He was not the careless young man she had invented in her memory to make the leaving easier. She had known he was not, but she had needed him to be. She rose, eventually. She replaced the book on the shelf without taking it, because she was beginning to understand the dangers of accumulation. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She did not look back. He had given her nothing except a room and silence, and the information that he did not object to her presence in his library at 2 a.m. She was a woman of practical intelligence. She knew what these things amounted to. She was also the daughter of a clergyman who had believed, until the last week of his life, that the world contained more good than cruelty, and that some people were capable of seeing clearly. She had buried that belief with him. She had thought. If you had asked Eliza Croft, in the 2nd month of her service at Ashmore, whether she expected her life to offer her another moment of genuine choice, she would have said no, and she would have meant it. The machinery of her circumstances had closed around her slowly enough that she had felt each gate shut, and she knew that the life of a woman in service, once properly settled into, has a fixed and not unpleasant arc. You became invisible. You learned the house. You grew older inside it, and eventually the house was more yours than the people who owned it, and that was a kind of dignity if you held it correctly. Mr. Gerald Foss arrived on a Thursday. He was a man of property and some consequence in the county, which is to say that he had more acres than character, and had spent 47 years being told his opinions were worth forming. He had a red face and a cold eye, and the manner of a man who has recently been told something flattering by his tailor. He came with 2 horses, a manservant, and the relaxed bearing of someone who expects his arrival to produce a specific quality of welcome. And it did. Lady Beatrice met him in the hall with the particular warmth she reserved for men who were useful. He had visited Ashmore before, more than once, and he moved through the lower rooms with the loose-limbed ease of a man who has decided that familiarity is the same as belonging. He and Lady Beatrice understood each other in the way that people understand each other when they have the same general view of who matters and who does not. He noticed Eliza at once. She was carrying a tray of tea things to the small drawing room when he came through the connecting door from the hall, and he stopped. And the quality of his pause was one she recognized, not surprise, not courtesy, but a particular consideration, the kind a man applies to an object he is trying to decide whether he wants. She moved past him with her eyes level and her face arranged, and the tray very steady in her hands. She was aware of his attention with the specific awareness that a woman in service learns, not a sensation that requires drama, but simply an alteration in the air of a room when certain kinds of attention enter it. He asked no questions. He made no comments. He watched, and she worked, and she avoided his direct line of sight with the practiced geometry of a woman who has learned to make a room's geography work in her favor. It was Mrs. Pendle who told her. On a Friday evening, when the house was quieter than usual, and Eliza was repairing the hem of a curtain in the upstairs sewing room, Mrs. Pendle came and sat across from her without invitation, and looked at her hands while she spoke. "Her ladyship told the staff this morning," Mrs. Pendle said, "that you are simply the housemaid, and need not be introduced to guests. Eliza kept her needle moving. Mr. Foss has been asking questions, Mrs. Pendle said. He has a large house in Berkshire. He is in want of a housekeeper. I am not a housekeeper, Eliza said. No, Mrs. Pendle said. You are not. She looked at Eliza then directly, with the expression of a woman who has seen the inside of enough great houses to know what they contain. Your father was Reverend Croft of Ipswich. Yes, Eliza said. I knew your father, Mrs. Pendle said. Not well. We had a cousin in common, which is not much. I knew his name, and I know yours, and I know what you were, and I know what you are now, and I am telling you that Lady Beatrice has decided that Mr. Foss is a solution to a question she has been asking herself. Eliza folded the curtain hem carefully and laid it in her lap. What question is that? She said. Mrs. Pendle stood. The question, she said, of what to do with a housemaid that the Duke has apparently noticed. She left. Eliza sat with the curtain in her lap and listened to the sound of the house. She was not afraid. Fear is a very specific animal, and what she felt was its quieter cousin. The recognition of a closed corridor, and the calm of a woman who has already spent 4 years walking without much light. She had known, had she not, that this was not a story she was permitted to be inside. She had understood that the night in the library. She had understood it every time his gaze had moved over her without arriving, and every time she had arranged the table, or carried the coal, or changed the flowers. And every time she had reminded herself that the woman who had stood under the eave and felt seen was a woman who no longer existed. She would leave. She would leave before Lady Beatrice's arrangement could be completed. She had 3 shillings and 4pence. The number came to her with the precise irony of things that repeat, and her father's watch, which she had kept against all practical wisdom and the ability to work, which was the only thing that had not been taken from her. She packed her small box that night, in the dark, without a candle. She came downstairs the following evening only because it was the last evening, and Mrs. Pendle had asked her to serve at dinner, and she was not yet gone, and leaving without notice would make things harder for Mrs. Pendle, who had been kind. The dinner was larger than usual. Mr. Foss had been invited, and Lady Beatrice had seated him at her right, and Miss Drummond was present with her mother, and there were 2 other guests whose names Eliza did not know. The table was lit with a great many candles, and the conversation had the particular quality of a social occasion that has an agenda beneath its surface. Eliza moved around the table's periphery. She was careful and quiet and efficient. She was also waiting, with the flat patience of a woman who has already decided for the evening to end. It was Mr. Foss who made it impossible to wait. He had drunk 3 glasses of wine by the second course, and his conversation had expanded accordingly. He was telling a story about some difficulty with his household staff, and the story had the particular rhythm of a man who enjoys an audience, and Lady Beatrice was listening with the attention of a woman who has an investment in the point it was building toward. The difficulty, Foss said, setting down his glass, is finding the right combination of competence and, shall we say, tractability. One wants a household that runs smoothly. One wants staff who understand their position. He paused. His eyes moved to where Eliza stood at the serving table. The pretty one, he said, addressing Lady Beatrice in the tone of a confidential aside that the whole table could hear. Is she just the housemaid, or is there some arrangement already in place? The table went quiet in the way that tables go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Eliza set down the dish she was holding with a steadiness that surprised her. Lady Beatrice opened her mouth. The Duke of Ashmore pushed back his chair. The sound of it reached every corner. the single specific sound of a chair pushed back on a stone floor in a quiet room. He rose. He was not a tall man in the theatrical sense, but he occupied space in a way that a theatrical man does not, the way a thing with mass and intention occupies space. He did not look at Foss. He looked at Eliza. The room watched. He crossed to where she stood. He stopped 3 feet from her, which was close enough that she could see the specific quality of his face, the jaw set, the eyes very still. A stillness that was not coldness, but something that had passed through coldness and arrived somewhere beyond it. He looked at her as though she were the only thing in the room worth looking at. He looked at her the way he had looked at her under the eave in the rain 4 years ago, before the carriage came. Except this time, the carriage was not coming. She did not look away. "She is Miss Croft of Ipswich," he said, "and she is mine." The room did not breathe. Lady Beatrice's fan stopped moving. Miss Drummond's expression arranged itself into something very careful. Foss had the look of a man who has put his hand on a surface that proved unexpectedly hot. Edmund did not address any of them. He extended his hand, palm up, and he waited. Eliza looked at his hand. She had packed her box. She had 3 shillings and 4pence. She had her father's watch and the ability to work, and a very thorough understanding of the difference between what she had been and what she was. And she had spent 4 years being precise about that difference, because precision was the only protection available to her. She took his hand. The room came back to life around them, in the way rooms do, in fragments, in averted eyes, in the particular social alchemy of people who have witnessed something, and must now decide, collectively, that they saw what they saw, and that it means what it means. Lady Beatrice said something to Miss Drummond's mother that Eliza did not hear. Foss reached for his wine. Mrs. Pendle, who had appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, said nothing at all, but her face was doing something quiet and satisfied that Eliza noted and filed and did not examine until later. Edmund turned toward the door, and she went with him, because his hand was solid and warm, and his grip was neither urgent nor uncertain, and she found that she had no remaining argument against it. They went to the small sitting room at the end of the corridor, the one that was not Lady Beatrice's and not the formal drawing room, and was therefore, in the geography of great houses, a room that belonged to no one's jurisdiction. He released her hand when they were inside. He did not go to a chair. He stood at the window, his back to the room for a moment, and then he turned. "I owe you an account," he said. "You owe me nothing," she said. "The rain," he said. "The lamb and flag." 4 years past October. You were going to Ipswich. The precision of it, the specific details named so simply in a voice that had held them for 4 years, without her knowing, undid something in her chest that she had not known was tied. "You remember," she said. "I have not stopped remembering," he said. "My man came for me. My brother was dying. I was already 3 days late. I thought." He stopped. He began again, with the care of a man choosing words for a weight they must actually carry. "I thought, if I stepped back toward you, I would not stop. And George had perhaps a week. I told myself I would find you. I told myself, Ipswich, the surgeons, a clergyman's daughter, it cannot be difficult. And then George died, and the title came, and I told myself a dozen other things, and none of them were true." Eliza looked at him. The fire was low in this room. The candlelight was soft and uneven, and it caught the line of his face the way the gray October light had caught it 4 years ago under the eave. "I packed my box tonight," she said. "I was going to leave in the morning." "I know," he said. "Mrs. Pendle told me this afternoon." There was a long silence. "When did you know it was me?" she said. "The second evening," he said. "In the hall, when you came to change the flowers. I saw you from the stair. You were standing in exactly the way you had stood under the eave, with exactly the same expression. The expression of a woman who is enduring something and is making a private compact with herself not to let it cost her anything she cannot afford. She said nothing. I should have spoken then, he said. I did not know how. And then, each day I did not speak made the next day harder. I am not skilled at approaching what I have already failed. He said this without self-pity, which was the only way it could have been said without breaking something. You did not fail me, she said. You had a brother dying. You got into a carriage. I left you in the rain, he said. Yes, she said. The word sat between them, honest and small, carrying everything it carried. He crossed the room. He stopped close enough that she could see the thread of gray at his temple, just beginning, and the specific quality of his eyes, which were dark gray and very direct, and the way his face looked when it was not doing the work of being a duke or a master of Ashmore, or any of the things that had accumulated between that morning and this one. He looked, for just a moment, like the man who had stood under an eave in a rainstorm and been surprised to find himself there. I cannot undo it, he said. I can tell you that I know what it cost you, and I can ask, if you will consider it, whether you might allow me to try. Eliza looked at him for a long time. She thought of the bill she had carried to the surgeon's office in the rain, and the 4 shillings she had not had, and the parsonage they had taken, and the 3 years of service in houses that did not see her, and the 1 winter in a milliner's shop in Bury St. Edmunds, where she had been cold every day from November to March. She thought of the portrait in the library, the laughing fair-haired man and the younger one, who was not quite reading. She thought of what it meant to carry a grief that had cost you something specific, and be the only person in the room who knew the shape of it. She put her hand in her apron pocket. The ribbon was there, as it always was, small and blue and frayed with 4 years of pocket-carrying, a piece of cheap silk that she had kept. Because there is a difference between the things you throw away and the things you find you cannot. She drew it out and held it in her palm. He looked at it. Something moved in his face, deep and brief, the way ice moves at the very start of spring when the melt is still invisible from above. I wore this, she said, the day it rained. He reached out with 2 fingers and very gently touched the edge of the ribbon, not taking it, not asking for it. The touch was barely there, and entirely there. Then you have carried it longer than I have carried my failure to deserve it, he said. It was not a handsome speech. It was not the speech of a man who had practiced. It was simply true, which was the only kind of speech she had ever trusted. You said I was yours, she said. Yes, he said. What did you mean by it? He looked at her with the steadiness of a man who has made a decision and knows it, and his eyes did not move from hers. I meant, he said, every legally possible version of that word. She considered this. She thought of Mrs. Pendle's expression in the doorway, the quiet, satisfied thing on her face. She thought of Lady Beatrice, who would recalibrate by morning, because Lady Beatrice was intelligent, and the difference between a housemaid and a duchess was not one she would fail to calculate. She thought of the packed box in her room, which had been practical 4 hours ago, and was now something else. She closed her hand around the ribbon. You will give me time, she said. As much as you require, he said. And you will not, she said, arrange things through Lady Beatrice. Something shifted in his face that was almost, in the uncertain candlelight of that improbable evening, the beginning of a smile. I will arrange nothing through Lady Beatrice, he said, for the remainder of my life, if you prefer it. She said, "That seems excessive." And he said, "I am a man with tendencies toward excess." And she was surprised to find that her own face was doing something she had not given it permission to do. By Christmas, the arrangements were made. Not loudly, not with the ceremony of the season's great houses, but in the quiet, procedural way that things are made when two people who have separately survived a long time of not having enough have decided, with full information, to do something about it. The parlor was warm on the evening of the settlement. Mrs. Pendle had made tea, which she left without comment, and the fire was the particular fire of a room that has been cold for a long time and has recently been given the wood it needed. Eliza sat in the chair by the window. It was snowing outside, the soft preliminary snow of early December that makes no argument for itself. Edmund sat across from her, a book open in his lap that he was not reading, and the room was very quiet. She had unpacked her box. The ribbon was on the windowsill beside her, no longer in her pocket, because she had discovered that the things you carry for years are sometimes lighter when you put them down somewhere specific. It was still frayed. It was still the pale blue of a December sky on the few days when December sky is permitted that color. She looked at it sometimes and thought about a rainstorm and an inn's eve, and a man who had looked back before he left, which was not the same as not leaving, but was also not nothing. Edmund looked up from the book he was not reading. "Eliza," he said. She looked at him. He said nothing else. There was nothing else required. Outside, the snow fell on Ashmore Park, on the gravel drive and the dark elms and the gray stone of the house's long front, and the fire burned, and the ribbon lay on the sill, and the room was warm. It was, she thought, enough. It was more than enough. It was everything she had been standing in the rain for.